Hey guys! So today's video, I'm really excited about this new project. I have been wanting to crochet something for my American Girl dolls for a while, but I felt like all of the yarn that I had was too thick to be scaled right for American Girl. The thinnest yarn that I have is a 4-weight and it still felt too thick for an American Girl. They're small, so I want the yarn to be thin enough to be a more accurate size compared to what they are. I recently went to this really cute yarn and fabric store in Media, and I picked up 2 skeins of yarn. I've already caked them up. So this first one is called Carmen. It is a mix of 80% merino wool and 20% nylon. It is sock weight, so it's very thin. It calls for a 2.25 to 3.5 millimeter crochet hook. Now, I don't have a hook that small. The smallest crochet hook that I have is a 4 millimeter crochet hook. It's very tiny. Still might be a little big for this yarn, but like I said, it's the smallest that I have, and I was already paying a little bit more than I wanted to just for 1 skein. I did buy 2, however. This is the other one that I got. This one is a superwash DK / sport yarn. 100% superwash merino wool, and it calls for a 3.5 to 4 millimeter crochet hook. And this one is called Sea Slug. I really liked how colorful it was. It is a little bit thicker than this one, but not by much. And I want to crochet at least 2 projects. I don't know how much I'll get out of these 2 skeins. I don't plan on combining them. I definitely want to make just one thing with this and just one thing with this. The first thing I want to do is a hexagon cardigan. It's super easy and it'll work up really fast since I don't have to make it super big. And then I might try to do a raglan top down. I'm a little bit more unsure about a pullover sweater. None of the clothes that I own for my dolls are a pullover of anything. They all have buttons, snaps, Velcro, or ties of some kind, and they just get pulled on like normal clothes like that. Yeah, so nothing that I own right now for them is pullover, but I definitely want to try it because it's not like a Barbie doll or a Monster High doll where the head is really big compared to a really tiny body. American Girl are definitely a little bit more proportional to a human, just smaller. So those are the 2 things that I'm thinking of: a hexagon cardigan and a raglan top-down pullover sweater. So let's jump right into me working on that.
I made some sleeves with that extra fabric that I had. I just took some elastic that was to the measurement of my upper arm and sewed the top part of the pattern together and came up with these sleeves that have a little slit in them, and my arm could be out in front. But yeah, now I'm moving on to the chainmail. All you need to start chainmailing is a pair of pliers, 2 of them, a pair of is one pair of tropical foresty looking garments. So I definitely want to try to incorporate that. Thinking a green.
Okay, so the pieces that I have crocheted are done. Things did not go as planned as I had originally intended, but the first thing that I made, which I did tell you, was a hexagon cardigan. Here is Sammy modeling it. Now, when I was purchasing the yarn, it was not in a ball, it was not in a skein or a cake, it was in a hank, which is very simply just the yarn looped over on itself over and over again, twisted, and then the two ends brought together and it twists in the opposite direction. And because of the way this yarn was dyed, the two halves were separated. So I could see all the brown, and then I can see the speckled multicolored half very separately. So in hank form, I thought the yarn was really pretty, but once I started working with it, I didn't like the color as much as I thought I would. I don't know if it's because the splotchiness is weird. I don't know. The construction was easy. It's, a hexagon cardigan. I've made a couple of those, made two halves, did single crochet to combine. Actually, what I did first was add 2 extra rows of double crochet granny clusters onto each half on just one side that I had picked to be the back. Then I single crocheted them together, and then I single crocheted down both arms to create the sleeves. It's a little bigger than I wanted. I was trying to make sure that it would fit, but I don't know if I was just having a hard time holding it up to know if it was going to fit or not. It ended up, as you can see, it's past her hands, completely covering her fingers. The length is good. It hits a little under the hip joint, but overall, I'm not a big fan of the color, and it probably could have been a little bit smaller. I also was originally going to steam it because my tension is not good, so things tend to curl, but steaming relaxes the fibers and tends to make things drapier and bigger, and I didn't want it any bigger than it already is. So that is the first project that I made with the first yarn. For the second yarn, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to make with it. While I was trying to figure that out, I decided to make a bucket hat. The method to make a bucket hat doesn't really need to be changed depending on the size of the hat you need it to be, because all you do is you stop early and start making each section earlier than you would for a human. And I've made bucket hats before. So here is the bucket hat. The brim didn't turn out as I wanted it to. It sits pretty flat. If I don't flip up the front, you can see it like kind of sticks out, but not really. But I like it up like this. It's a little loose. I probably could have gone a little smaller. It's really easy. You just do a magic circle, 12 double crochets into the magic circle, and then 24, an increase into every stitch on the next row, making sure to flip over before you start your next row. So you do the 12, you chain up 2 or 3, however you prefer it. You then flip over the whole thing and you go back in the opposite direction to what your first one was, and so on and so forth. And you do an increase, you do these increase rows where every row there is another single double crochet in between your increases until you find that it's big enough, whether it's for yourself and it sits comfortably and it covers your head, or same for the doll, or any size for a child. At that point, you stop doing any increases and it will naturally curve down because it has nowhere else to go. With the increases, it can continuously get bigger and bigger and bigger, but once you stop, it can't go anywhere, so it just starts to go down or up, technically, if you're crocheting it from this angle, if you crochet it up like this. And you just keep doing that until you find that the length here is good, you then go back to doing increases. Now, I've seen some tutorials where I've watched one tutorial on this method where it's just double crochets. I've also watched one where it was granny clusters. I think for both, they said, let's just say you did 1, 2, 3, 4 rows for the crown of the head, and you would have this initial 12, 24 with no double crochets in between the increases, 1 in between all, and then 2 in between all the increases, and then you stop. They would then tell you to count however many rows are the sides, and you jump from the 2 between each increase to like 8 or whatever between each increase, and it doesn't look right. When I did it for myself, it didn't look right, and it didn't make any sense to me. It's like, why would I jump so far ahead in increases when the size hasn't changed? Like, yeah, it's multiple rows later, but the actual size is only 1 row more than it was. It's hard to explain if you've never done it before, and I don't even know if you have done it before if I'm explaining it well. It makes sense to me, so I think I did maybe 4 or 5 rows, so I would have only had done either 2 or 3 double crochets between the increases. And so when I wanted to start the brim, I immediately pick up where I left off and go start doing 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 or whatever the number would be, just 1 more, as if I was continuing to just go in that flat circle. Anyway, I really like how the hat turned out, and I really like this yarn. Something that I noticed after I started, because this is the superwash merino wool, and the other one is merino wool and an acrylic blend. And as soon as I started using this one, it felt so soft. Compared to this suddenly feels extremely rough. And I don't know what's the difference. I don't know what the process is for a superwash. Judging by its name, it is washed very well, and that's what gives it its very soft texture. Now, after the hat, I was still wanting to make a bigger piece because I have pretty decent amount of yarn for each skein, and I don't use this weight of yarn, so I wanted to use up as much of it as I could. So I was scouring the internet for ideas, and I just didn't want to do another hexagon cardigan. I literally just did that, and I didn't want to do, well, I did kind of want to do like a pullover sweater, and I contemplated doing a raglan top down, but I don't think I would have actually been able to make it a physical pullover, even though I'm pretty sure an American Girl doll's scale isn't as disproportionate as some like Barbies and stuff like that. I think generally it's just best to have it be either split up the front or up the back with Velcro or snaps or whatever. But I did contemplate doing a raglan top down, but I didn't feel like having to do all the math to make sure that it would, 1, fit, and 2, actually be able to pull over her head, and do it at a smaller scale where it would make sense. And I just didn't feel like dealing with all of that. Not wanting to do a raglan top down and all-in-one type sweater, I figured I can just wing it and make it however I want and just do it in pieces. 1 front piece, 2 sleeves, 2 back pieces with an overlap for buttons or whatever. But I didn't want to start making it and cutting up the yarn for the different pieces, only to find that it's not working and either have to scrap the whole thing and never touch that section of yarn again, or frog all of it and have to tie it all back together to get usable yarn out of it, and in which case I would have yarn with lots of knots in it. So I was really hesitant to cut up the yarn in any way because of this fact. Especially because I only have the 1 skein. It was expensive for 1 skein, though it was, I'm assuming, hand-dyed. Maybe by the people who own the shop, I don't know. that it's just better to figure it out before you start cutting it up a lot to make different pieces for something. In my search, I was searching both Google for sources outside of YouTube, and I was searching YouTube. I was finding a lot of the crochet for an 18-inch doll like an American Girl. They use a 4-weight yarn, which is the weight of yarn I usually use for all of my crochet projects. And then in a corresponding hook of like 5 or 5.5 millimeter. And I was honestly surprised that so many people were just automatically using 4-weight yarn, because I don't know, in my head, the reason why I bought such thin yarn is because I wanted the projects to be scaled down as close to what would be an appropriate size for an American Girl. Like, I've seen the knitted sweaters that you can buy, maybe not, I don't know if they sell any knitted sweater type clothes for American Girl now, but for older pieces, the knitting needles are really tiny, and so is the yarn, so it looks more appropriately sized for a small doll. So I was surprised to find that a lot of these crochet projects were using what I would consider a normal size yarn, and so the yarn looks super bulky on a doll. That's one of the reasons why I wanted it, because imagine the granny clusters in a hexagon cardigan being double the size. If I had used a 4-weight yarn and a 5 millimeter hook, which is what I used for my rainbow hexagon sweater that I made a while ago, it's either a 5 or a 5.5, I can't remember. The granny clusters are like this big compared to these where they're much smaller, and I thought it would look weird on a doll to be so big. So I was having a hard time finding projects that used a lighter weight yarn and a smaller hook. There were some written patterns, but I really struggle with reading written patterns. All the abbreviations, I am not a natural pattern reader when it comes to crochet. So all of the abbreviations mean, it's just gibberish to me. And a lot of the crochet projects on YouTube that I was seeing, again, were using 4-weight yarn and larger hooks, but it was also, I don't know, just something about it didn't look like something that I would want my dolls to wear. So it took a lot of time for me to figure it out. After I decided not to do a raglan top down, not to try and figure out a sweater on my own, I had somebody suggest to me, why not make like a summer dress with spaghetti straps? So I'm thinking, okay, and YouTube, there are quite a few dress patterns on there for American Girl and similarly sized dolls, but I didn't feel like following a pattern because of the fact that my yarn and hook was a different size. I would have to adjust everything anyway. So I thought, why don't I just make it how I want, or try to make it in a certain way. So I first started with just double crochet, making a rectangle that would wrap around the torso with an overlap. But I quickly realized that having it sit as just a rectangle under the armpits, it sat very low on the chest. So then I would have to figure out a way to kind of make the straps thicker where it connected and then tapered to narrower, so it would look a little bit better. I also didn't like how the double crochet were stretching out each row, so there was these gaps in between. I wanted it to be a little bit more solid, since it's such, even at a smaller hook and yarn size, it felt so much bigger on an American Girl doll. I then tried to do just the rectangle, summer dress thing with single crochet. I think that's when I realized that where it would sit under the armpits would sit too low for what I wanted it to look like. So I frogged that as well. I remembered there was one pattern that I saw on YouTube that the shape of the dress was more of what I wanted, with thinner straps. So I watched it. Yes, they used a 5 millimeter hook and a 4-weight yarn. That was fine. I was just wanting to watch it to kind of see how it was constructed, to then figure it out on my own by adjusting how many stitches and all that kind of stuff. Something else that I noticed, because this was not the first one that I tried watching and didn't like, is that a lot of these patterns, they are using half double crochets instead of single or double. And I personally have never made a project with half double crochets. I tend to almost exclusively use double crochets. And when I was trying to make this other tutorial dress, I don't remember what it was exactly, with half double crochets, because I'm so not conditioned, my muscle memory is double crochet, like, because for years it's almost exclusively, like I said, the only stitch I use, double crochets. Because of that, I had to focus so intently on what I was doing to prevent me from doing double crochets instead of the half doubles, that it was just not worth my time. It would have taken me so much slower to make the project in the first place, because of the fact that I had to use all of my brain power to keep my muscle memory from doing double crochets. So that was something else that I had to kind of work around with these patterns, is that everybody was doing half doubles, and while I didn't like the double crochet look at this scale, I also had to, it was just better for me to not do a half double crochet. So the pattern that I did find was a summer style dress with a fitted bodice, skinny straps for sleeves, and a flared out skirt. And I had watched it once to kind of get an idea of how it was made, and then I started doing it myself with single crochet. I had to start over a couple of times because my measurements weren't quite working out how I wanted. Basically, you do single crochets, half double crochets, whatever type of stitch you're using, and make a flat piece until you want it to stop being straps and to turn it into the underarm section. You would then do a chain and connect back up with the piece to be the armhole and continue from there. And I was seeing a lot of these projects were like that. They had that kind of shape where you can see across the front and up the shoulders were all together, but then attached still to the front, it would go under. And it's because of that chain creating a hole for the arms. And so I was doing that with single crochet, making sure that there was an overlap, because in the video, they said that they were going to explain how they did buttons and buttonholes in a separate video. And I never bothered to look for it because I felt that was a little ridiculous. Just put it all in one video. But I never watched it. So me trying to figure out this pattern, considering I had to basically do everything from scratch, figuring out how many stitches, holding it up to a doll, seeing where it hits, making sure I want armholes to be a certain size because my first attempt they were too small, so on and so forth. I didn't really think about buttons and buttonholes until I was not quite halfway through, but a decent amount through. And so what I did is I just did a little bit of a chain. I did chain 3, and then 3 stitches later connected it up with itself just to create a buttonhole that was big enough for a medium, like a medium, small to medium button. And that worked out fine. Wish I had done it a little sooner because it's a little low, that first one, but it's fine. The issue came after I did my second buttonhole and realized that I didn't know how it was going to work, where it has to have an overlap. But the thing I remembered about when she started the skirt was that she joined those two ends up just to touch and then doing the skirt. But that doesn't work if I have to overlap. I eventually watched the video on buttons and buttonholes that she had made, and her bodice pieces just barely touched in the back, and she crocheted extra stuff with a buttonhole on it, and then sewed buttons onto the other half, and it was not what I had done at all. So I stopped and I made a top. It is a little loose. I like that it's tight, around the straps. Like I said, I was doing single crochet. I wish I had done 3 rows because I only did 2 and I didn't quite like how it was looking as just a 2-row strap. I wish I had done 3, but by the time I had decided I didn't like it, I was not starting over again, because this is the bottom of your piece. It's the very beginning of your piece where you do this part, and then you do a chain and you join it under. Here is the back. You can see what I mean by how I wish that first buttonhole was higher. I almost wish I could have flipped the whole thing upside down so that this was the top buttonhole and this was the bottom one. But because of the straps, I can't do that. That's fine. Let me get her hair out of the way. So it's just a straight rectangle with the exception of the holes created from the armholes and the buttonholes. And I just stopped it at a comfortable place. It kind of gives, it's like a little tank top. It could be a little cropped if she was wearing something else on the bottom. These pants are a little high-waisted, but I think it's really cute. I really like this yarn. I love the color. It's super bright and colorful. Will I make a dress eventually? Not with this yarn. I'll probably end up following that tutorial more closely, and use a 4-weight with a 5mm hook, because I'm not trying to figure out the whole thing all over again. Will I make another top like this? Probably not. I saw some like t-shirt patterns and more traditional looking cardigan patterns. Maybe I'll try that. I don't know. I don't really know if it's worth making. I have a lot of this yarn left over because I barely used any. For these 2, I barely used any. Maybe down the line I'll make a separate skirt piece that can be worn with this or worn separately, which honestly is better because then it means I have more options. Overall, it took a little bit longer than I expected because of the fact that I had to keep stopping, restarting, frogging, trying to figure it out, making a hat, and then trying to figure out what else to make with this yarn. This cardigan didn't take very long at all. It's maybe 3 days, 4 days with the stitching together and all of that. The hat literally took a couple of hours. And then the top, just because of all the starting and stopping, I'm not quite sure how long it actually took me. Probably only like a day or 2. But I am happy, at least with these 2 pieces. Not so much with this. I am happy with what I got out of it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy crochet, sewing, or any other kinds of crafts, please consider a follow. I upload every Sunday, and I hope to see you there. Bye.